Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's Prime Minister is hoping to deliver a letter from President Moon Jae-in to the Prime Minister of Japan next week. It could be a chance for the two countries to start repairing the recent damage to their relations. South Korean Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi meets with his U.S. counterpart Steven Mnuchin. They sign an MOU that'll enable them to invest more together in energy and infrastructure around the world. And China in the third quarter posts its weakest economic growth in 27 years, just 6%, as the trade war with the U.S. takes its toll. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. President Moon Jae-in is meeting at the Blue House this afternoon with foreign diplomats based in Seoul. He's expected to ask for their support for his peace drive on the Korean peninsula and also for the South Korea-ASEAN Special Summit coming up in November. At the meeting are around 200 ambassadors and representatives of international organizations, marking the first time President Moon has invited all the diplomats at once. Previous administrations used to hold such meetings regularly, but because of President Moon's busy schedule and overseas trips, the meeting was delayed. Japanese Ambassador Yasumasa Nagamine is also there. The meeting is still underway, but President Moon is not likely to meet with him separately or address Seoul-Tokyo relations today. South Korea's National Security Council has agreed to take a phased approach to transforming the DMZ into a global peace zone, a vision laid out by President Moon in his UN General Assembly speech last month. At a meeting Friday of the NSC's Standing Committee, led by National Security Advisor Chung Yi-yong, they agreed to begin with practical steps that can be carried out in the early stages. Members also reviewed the progress so far in negotiations with Washington about how much Korea will pay for U.S. troops stationed in Korea, with the two sides reportedly set to hold talks in Hawaii next week. The NSC will also continue to work closely with the U.S. and the international community for the early resumption of talks between North Korea and the U.S. to achieve denuclearization. A former U.S. official says the only way to denuclearize North Korea is through an interim deal that involves concrete steps to be taken by both sides. This is according to Joseph Yoon, the former U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy, in an interview this week with Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency. He said the North should offer Washington a roadmap and give up more than just its Yongbyon nuclear facility, the Dongchangni missile site, and the Punggye-ri nuclear test site, which it has already put on the table. On the U.S. side, Yoon suggested some form of sanctions relief in return, as well as declaring a formal end to the Korean War to replace the current armistice. The Tokyo Olympics are less than a year away, but serious problems are arising for the organizers. Tokyo's notoriously hot and humid summer has prompted the International Olympic Committee to move the marathon event to a cooler part of Japan for the safety of the participants. Choi Jang-yoon reports.
The 2020 Tokyo Olympics will be held from July 24th to August 9th next year. At that same time of the year, highs in the Japanese capital can hit a sweltering 40 degrees Celsius. During the same period this year, around 50 people died due to the intense heat and thousands were hospitalized. In order to protect athletes from the scorching heat, the International Olympic Committee has announced plans to shift the location of the marathon and the walking races to Sapporo, Hokkaido, a cooler northern island in Japan. Some 800 kilometers north of Tokyo, the region is on average 5 degrees Celsius cooler than the capital. The IOC's sudden announcement is causing headaches for the 2020 organizers, as they had already scheduled tours taking its spots along the original marathon course and had been preparing to promote it worldwide.
The plan to move those events from Tokyo to Sapporo was a bit of a surprise. To be honest, we only received this news several days ago.
There are also growing concerns about radiation. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe previously insisted the crippled Fukushima power plant was nothing to worry about when Tokyo was bidding for the game in 2013. However, with Typhoon Hagibis striking Fukushima, Japan's poor management of the contaminated waste was laid bare. Despite forecasts predicting torrential downpours, storage was not sufficient to stop an unknown number of bags containing contaminated waste from floating away and disappearing. Local officials insist the incident will not affect the environment, but half of the bags that were retrieved were found to be empty. Choi Jang-yoon, Arirang News.
A couple of chances coming up for South Korea and Japan to try and repair their ties. The South Korean Prime Minister is going to Tokyo next week, and word is he might bring a friendly letter from President Moon to give to the Japanese Prime Minister. Shin Se-min has this report.
Perhaps a friendly letter from South Korean President Moon Jae-in to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, helping to defrost the bilateral relations between the two countries. South Korean Prime Minister Lee Na-gyun says that he has requested a letter from Moon so he can deliver the message to the Japanese leader when he visits Tokyo next week to attend the enthronement ceremony of Emperor Naruhito on October 22nd. In an interview with Japan's Kyodo News on Friday, Prime Minister Lee said he is keen to be messenger between the two leaders, adding that he will listen to Abe's words sincerely and do his best to explain the thoughts of President Moon and himself. An official at the top office, in regards to the PM's interview, said it's difficult to say whether a letter is being prepared, but said such discussions between the president and the prime minister had in fact taken place. As for his visit to Japan, Lee said he hopes the two leaders can resolve the matters between the two sides as historical obligations, and added that it will not take long to solve the bilateral friction, given that the leaders both appear to have a strong will to do so before the end of their terms. Also speaking to Asahi Shimbun, the prime minister said if Japan rolls back its trade restrictions against South Korea, then the two sides can review the possibility of Seoul rejoining its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan, and added that all of this is possible if the two sides make a real effort. South Korea's Prime Minister's office confirmed on Friday that the one-on-one meeting between PMs Lee and Abe will be on October 24th, but the duration of that meeting is still unknown. That meeting, although expected to be a brief encounter, will be the highest-level meeting between the two neighboring countries since their relations tanked to their lowest level in decades. Topping the agenda for the talks may be Japan's export curbs, which are seen as political retaliation for a South Korean top court's ruling last year that ordered Japanese firms to compensate victims of forced labor in the early 1900s. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
For the seventh month in a row, a report from the Finance Ministry has described the South Korean economy as stagnant, with a weak outlook for investment and exports. Hong Yu has the details.
Production growth has continued, but exports and investment have been sluggish. With that evaluation, the Finance Ministry concluded in its Green Book report on Friday that the economy is still stagnant for the seventh month in a row. This is due to a shrinking of the global manufacturing industry and global trade, which is slowing global economic growth and dragging the semiconductor business into a slump. The ministry also cited Japan's export curbs in South Korea and the U.S.-China trade dispute. Exports have been in decline for 10 consecutive months since last December. Exports for the month of September alone saw a decrease of 11.7% on year, with $44.7 billion of exports. There were more outbound shipments of cars and vessels, but other products such as semiconductors and petroleum products were exported less, mainly to countries such as China and the Middle East. But production continues to grow in the service sector, with the month of August seeing a 0.5% production increase on month. Consumer prices in September fell by 0.4%, the first drop seen since 1965. The ministry says it was due to the dragging slump in price of agricultural and petroleum products and a base effect. Employment figures for September showed a brighter picture for job seekers for the second month in a row, and the unemployment rate was 3.1%, the lowest for the month in 5 years. The ministry says it will accelerate fiscal measures and use policies to support the revitalization of investment, domestic demand, and exports, while making full efforts to manage risks such as responding to Japan's export regulations. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. have signed an MOU to better enable investors in both countries to work together on financing infrastructure and energy projects. Seoul's Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki signed it on Thursday in Washington with his American counterpart Stephen Mnuchin. Kim Hae-sung reports.
South Korea and the United States signed a memorandum of understanding in Washington on Thursday to strengthen financing for energy and infrastructure projects. It's the first MOU signed between the finance ministries of the two countries, with both saying it reaffirms the strong relationship between Seoul and Washington. South Korea's Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said the agreement is expected to support infrastructure development in Latin America and Southeast Asia through private investment, and the working groups on the matter will begin work soon. He added the MOU is expected to scale growth opportunities for both countries as it supports Korea's new northern policy in Southeast Asia and Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. Minister Hong also addressed the issue of Iran sanctions and the need for a swift resolution to Japan's export curbs on South Korea, saying it could disrupt the global value chain and hurt global growth. While expressing hope Seoul and Tokyo's economic cooperative relationship can be brought back on track soon, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also highly assessed Seoul's efforts for a transparent foreign exchange policy. South Korea is currently listed on the U.S. Treasury Department's currency manipulation monitoring list. The U.S. is due to release its biannual foreign exchange report later this month. Minister Hong also called for an exemption from possible tariffs on South Korea's auto exports to the U.S. President Trump is expected to decide whether to impose tariffs on imported automobiles from South Korea, Japan, the EU, and others by the end of next month. 김혜성, 아리랑 뉴스.
Preliminary figures show China's economy growing in the third quarter at its slowest pace in 27 years. China's National Bureau of Statistics said Friday that the economy grew 6% on year in the July to September period, slightly down from the previous quarter. Although the agency did not give reasons for the slowdown, experts say it's likely China is feeling the heat from its trade war with the U.S. It's time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined by Dr. Kim Se-wan, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Dr. Kim, thank you for coming on today.
Good afternoon.
Well, the IMF this week lowered its forecast for global economic growth for this year. 3% is the figure now, the lowest since the financial crisis a decade ago. And for China, as we just heard, the forecast is the lowest in 27 years. What's happening in the global economy?
It is true that major economies are experiencing downturns from the end of last year, except the United States economy. IMF forecast this year's global economic growth would be 3%, which has been lowered by 0.3% compared to 6 months ago forecast. Particularly, Chinese economic growth forecast is about 6%. So as we talked about, it is one of the lowest in the last 30-some years. So I believe that Chinese economy is directly affected by U.S.-China trade conflict. And in addition, German economy is no good at all. Its economic growth forecast for this year is about 0.5%, which is really low. And Japanese economy's economic growth forecast is about 1% around. So current economic global recession is the most serious one after economic crisis of 2008. But the problem is there is a possibility that it could be even worse. Even global risk factors are not well controlled.
Right. Well, just to clarify for our viewers there, the screen said the GDP forecast was 2% for the global economy. It's actually 3%. But for Korea's economic growth this year, Bloomberg's compiled an average of estimates from 41 institutions here and overseas. That average is 1.9% growth. What do you make of that figure?
Recently, Bloomberg averaged Korean economic growth forecast of 41 institutions, including ING, S&P, and other quite a few foreign institutions. And it was about 1.9%, which was much less than Bank of Korea's 2.2% economic growth forecast. Because Korean economy is one of the most foreign-dependent one, it looks that foreign investors see that Korean economy is structurally more vulnerable to a global economic risk like U.S.-China trade war, Brexit, and Korea-Japan trade conflict.
Right. Well, to sort of turn this thing around, we have international organizations calling for the Korean government to ramp up fiscal spending. But what about the government's financial situation? There are concerns there, too.
I think expansionary fiscal policy or more spending by government would be the only and the most efficient buffer to Korean economy under a recession. The interest rate is already pretty low to its historical level, and it looks that it does not stimulate economic growth even with lower rate like 1%. And regarding Korean government debt situation, it is about the 40% of the total GDP and about 660 trillion Korean won. And these are really healthy figures compared to other countries like over 200% of Japan and 160% of the GDP of the United States. So I think relatively Korean government has a deeper and more resources to implement expansionary fiscal policy.
Well, you mentioned the option of lowering interest rates, and of course the BOK did lower its policy rate this week down to a record low of 1.25%. What are they hoping to accomplish with that, and at the same time, what might there be to worry about?
Bank of Korea has cut its policy rate for a second time to stimulate economic growth on Wednesday, and its base rate was cut by 0.25% of a percentage point to 1.25%. So as we talked about, the low interest rate or expansionary monetary policy does not save economy without the support of the expansionary fiscal policy. So under this difficult situation of the Korean economy, the policy cooperation between central bank and government is really crucial.
Right. Well, President Moon announced some other new measures yesterday, more investment in construction to help the economy. What stands out to you in these measures?
I think President Moon became pretty sensitive on economic status after understanding the recessionary situation of Korean economy. Particularly in yesterday's out-of-schedule meeting with economy-related cabinet members, President Moon emphasized revitalization of private investment and consumption. So along with implementing expansionary fiscal policy, he also reiterated government plans to increase investment in construction section, particularly on SOC, like railroads, highways, and so on. Actually, stimulating construction part is something avoided by President Moon because he has been blaming previous government for doing that. But I think he has changed his mind for revitalizing private sector. So we can expect that this construction activity led by government would activate the economy only in the short run. So in the long run, there should be more serious structural reforms and labor market reforms together.
Yeah, as you point out, I think it was a surprise to many people hearing construction investment coming from President Moon. But Dr. Kim, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Now, a pop-up store opened today in Seoul's Gangnam district, dedicated entirely to the K-pop sensations BTS. It takes up a whole 3-story building that's pink inside and out, the color of the band's latest album, Map of the Soul, Persona. Visitors can experience the virtual world within BTS's music videos, buy BTS merchandise, food and drinks, and listen to new remixes of their hit tunes. Naturally, thousands of BTS fans, the BTS Army, have shown up from around the world, with some having camped out all night. It's expected to attract a ton more visitors over the next 80 days while it's open. Britain and the European Union have agreed to new terms for the UK to exit the bloc, paving the way for a blockbuster vote in the British Parliament on Saturday. Lee Sung-jae has more.
The leaders of the United Kingdom and the European Union on Thursday unanimously endorsed a new Brexit divorce deal ahead of the October 31st deadline for Britain to leave the EU. Speaking at a news conference in Brussels, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson stressed the importance of the deal and what it would mean for both the UK and the EU.
I want to stress that this is a great deal for our country, for the UK. I also believe it's a very good deal for our friends in the EU. And what it means is that we in the UK can come out of the EU as one united kingdom. England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland together. And it means we can decide our future together. We can decide, we can take back control, as the phrase goes, of our money, our borders, our laws together. And we will be able to do free trade agreements around the world.
However, getting the necessary votes at home will be a tall task for the Prime Minister, who was one of the faces of the 2016 campaign to leave the EU. Johnson brushed off suggestions that he won't be able to persuade enough lawmakers to pass the deal this weekend, after his allies in Parliament, Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, rejected the deal. Despite having to overcome that hurdle, the Prime Minister said he was feeling positive.
And I'm very confident that when my colleagues in Parliament study this agreement, that they will want to vote for it on Saturday and then in succeeding days.
European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker also insisted a deal must be made and that there would be no further extension.
I hope it will. I'm convinced it will. But it has to.
It has to, but if it doesn't?
Anyway, there will be no prolongation.
There will be no...
Johnson and his team hope the threat of Britain leaving without a deal on its October 31st deadline will concentrate minds in Parliament, which has rejected agreements negotiated by his predecessor, Theresa May, 3 times, which ultimately forced her to resign earlier this year. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The pleasant autumn weather we're having in Korea these days has people heading outdoors. And if you're in the country and planning your weekend, our Kim Bo-kyung has this report.
The leaves have already changed color on several mountains around Korea. Seoraksan in Odaesan Mountains will see leaves reach their peak autumn colors this weekend, and mountains near the capital will be the most beautiful next week, followed by southern regions of Korea reaching their peak in early November. But as well as enjoying the red and orange autumn leaves on the mountains, there are plenty of other places where people can enjoy the autumn weather. One such place is Haneul Park, located at the highest point of World Cup Park in western Seoul. With the Seoul Silver Grass Festival kicking off on Friday, Haneul Park is packed with people taking in the calm autumn breeze and vividly colored plants. The vast expanse of grass that's peppered with tall silver grass attracts plenty of couples.
We came up to Seoul for the first time from Masan. We came here by chance and it's really nice.
The silver grass is not the only attraction to catch your eye at Haneul Park. 2 other popular plants in this park are the pink muhly grass, which has an attractive soft pink color, and broom cypress, a small rounded plant which turns red as it matures. Visitors are busy snapping photos with friends in front of a huge bloom of cotton candy.
I thought there would only be silver grass. It's beautiful to see pink muhly grass as well.
Broom cypress is another crowd pleaser. This ornamental plant with bright red leaves spruces up the scene even more.
It's very beautiful here and very special. Yeah, I love it.
The Seoul Silver Grass Festival runs through next Thursday. This year, the festival will stay open until 10 p.m. every night, meaning visitors can enjoy the festival for 2 more hours than usual. However, bear in mind that as this weekend is the only weekend during the festival period, big crowds are expected. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
More than 100 days have passed since the start of the Seoul-Tokyo trade route. There may be an opportunity